Welcome to the book talking by the school librarians of the Southern Tier East. That is us. We'll post some information at some point about our organization. Well, links to information about our organization if someone is interested. We've got links to our contacts. Although Tatiana, I don't think you had a chance to put your links in, but maybe at some point you might. But we'll make sure everybody gets the information that they need for the contacts. So this was a great opportunity. This is something that I think I speak for my colleagues that this is absolutely the favorite thing I like to do. We love to talk about books. Sorry, I want to turn so there's a sword in the background. Yeah. Anna Rose has Broadway posters. Tatiana has a blank wall, but there might be children at some point. I have a sword. There we go. So this is what we love to do more than anything else, is to share books and with folks that are out there. And so I can't tell if there's anybody there. Doesn't look like it. We'll see if anybody joins us. That would be nice. But if not, we'll just share with each other, because we never get to do this. So
I know, we're always talking business, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or, whatever. So it's nice for us to get to talk books for a little bit. So we've got a little slideshow that has Anna Rose and I have put some books up, and then Tatiana's got books she's going to share. I've got books.
Old school style. I don't even own copies of my books.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let me go ahead and share this. First we need to introduce ourselves. So I am Kathy Starks. I am the librarian at Owego Free Academy and Owego Appalachian Middle School. Formerly just Free Academy, but now both. So I essentially, serve, I don't know, 1,100 students, which is great. I love having that many students. And I we've had a table at RoberCon for as long as RoberCon went on. We had a table where we handed out science fiction and fantasy science fiction and fantasy books to kids pre-K through 12, which was great. We love doing that, and hopefully someday we'll get to do that again. Pandemic going away at some point, hopefully. And I've been reading science fiction and fantasies from the very beginning, pretty much. And at least one of the books that I'm going to talk about was a favorite of mine from way back in the day. So it's definitely a genre that's a favorite with many of us, and especially with the other two that are going to be participating. So would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I can go next. So my name's Anna Rose Foley, and I'm the teacher librarian at Boynton Middle School in the Ithaca City School District. But I still am technically part of the School Librarians of the Southern Tier East because I live here in Binghamton, and I originally worked in the greater Binghamton area as well. Year 13 for me, and I'm super excited to be recommending books, whether it's live and in person to anybody who may join us, or on a recording later. I literally just told the last of my 550 students who I've seen come through the library for library orientations and book talking this month, that this is why I became a school librarian, was to read and recommend books to students and have them hopefully give them a try and enjoy them and talk to me about them as well. And that experience is everything. So I have to tell you, after the last 18 months, watching the students walk out of the library with stacks of books, it's one of those heart-bursting moments kind of thing. So as far as sci-fi and fantasy is concerned, it is for sure my favorite genre to read and my least favorite genre to book talk, because it's impossible. Like, how do you explain Narnia to somebody who has no idea what you're talking about, or Middle Earth, or any other high fantasy location, right? It's very challenging in like a 2 to 5 minute book talk with middle schoolers. I'm always like, just bear with me, guys, or this is the general gist. But yeah, so the 4 books I'm going to recommend today came directly off of the slideshows that I just did with my students. So I had a bunch of takers, so I must have done an okay job. I should have been highlighting my favorite fantasy author, though. That is definitely Tamara Pierce. The Song of the Lioness Quartet. I mean, I was in 6th grade and I was already a reader for sure, but I was definitely in like the Babysitters Club rut. And this was really what brought me out and into this genre for sure, but just in reading in general. And of course, I had the opportunity to meet her a few years ago at RoberCon. Yeah, at RoberCon. And yeah. It was of course life-changing. She's absolutely amazing. So I
believe we have a picture to look for.
Oh yeah, for sure. If I was talking of one of the books with her, I would have had my picture up there too. But anyway, that's me. And yeah, I'm very excited to share books with you shortly.
And I'm Tatiana Rabnik. I'm one of the librarians at Binghamton High School. And I have no idea what year I'm in, but it's somewhere in the teens, upper teens, because I've bounced from being in school library and then being like a district librarian where I support libraries. And that was in California. And so now I'm starting my 4th year at Binghamton. And it's just been interesting because the first year's a blur. And then we had COVID. So,
right.
But I have to say, we've been distributing Chromebooks, but kids have been coming in and checking books out without any prompting from us. And it's just amazing. We've done ILLs, we've done interlibrary loans, and we've checked out books, and I've talked about books, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm here for. And I love it. And the 2 series I want to talk about today are, I think, one of my most recent favorite series. But I started off with what I think was David Eddings and Raymond E. Feist. Is and also the was it Terran the Wanderer, all that series.
Oh, Lloyd Alexander.
Yeah. So I think those were really where it started. Although Chronicles of Narnia was the very first series I read on my own. Yeah. So there we go. Nice. Origin story.
Yeah. Nice. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in here. So let me share my screen real quick. And Anna Rose, would you take a picture at some point?
Absolutely. We always forget. So thank you for reminding me.
Yes, I meant to bring my camera up here, my phone, to take a picture, but instead it will be you. All right. So I'm starting out. You guys see my screen okay? I know you see yourselves. Guys see everything okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Good. So I'm starting out with the Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. Again, these were books that I discovered quite early on. They were published in the mid-60s, so right about the time I was born. So we're talking about how old I am now. And they're based on Welsh mythology. And I didn't really know that at the beginning. Just knew that they were interesting books, and I was into fantasy, and I actually just reread the entire series last summer. I had forgotten how good these were, how the language. I've sort of been reading more about the level of the language that's in these, and so that they may have been published for a younger audience, but the language is so good, and there's no talking down to the reader in any of these. These are 5 books I bought years ago from the Science Fiction and Fantasy Book Club. Does anybody remember the Science and Fiction and Fantasy? Yes, there was a book club that was just science fiction and fantasy, and they had one single volume that had all of them in there. And that's what I read. And then I had to give it back to my son because he loves it. So each volume is quite short. It's very interesting. So here is actually Tehran Wanderer, which is the 4th book, and it's not particularly lengthy, but each of them has so much character development in it. You might recognize the name of The Black Cauldron was made into a really bad Disney movie. Really, yeah, not good. But the way the characters are developed throughout the stories, the introduction of the ultimate coming of age story. That's what I loved about the way these books were written. Tehran in the 1st book, and I'm kind of guessing on the pronunciation, by the way, this is Welsh, based on Welsh mythology. It wasn't until years later that I discovered that one of the major characters is Eilonwy. Did we know this? That was how you pronounce her name? This is the major female character. Again, the Chronicles of Prydain. I was very careful to look up the pronunciation of that. And years, of course, in my head, I'm saying it a different way. But I found out the more correct pronunciation. And again, rereading it, I appreciated so much how the author was able to tell these stories. They're not told in such a way that a teenager or a young teen would not get it, but the language is so complicated. And so any kid reading this is going to get some really, really big words. And then, here's a young kid being exposed to some really good, complex language, good storytelling, interesting side characters. And then, I mean, just the way the characters are presented. Again, Tehran himself, the main character who goes through all the way through, he's so goofy. He's such a middle school student at the beginning. And the way he has his pride and his honor, and none of it makes any sense. And then he is exposed to adult characters that are so wonderful. And the way he takes in that, the way they approach each other, the way they relate to each other. And actually, of all the series, my favorite is the 4th book, Tehran Wanderer, where he grows as a character. His character arc is so good in that. He's trying to figure out who his father is. He thinks he finds out who his father is. It turns out that it's not his father. And he has these really interesting conflicts of emotion, and being proud, and then but also being really trying to deal with his pride. And then the bad guys are so bad in it. They have that wonderful, there's no like black and white in terms of the bad guys. The bad guys are either they're bad, and then there's some guys who are kind of bad, but not all that bad. They're just these wonderful, wonderful characters. And it's one of those books that I really think stands up beautifully to the test of time, despite the fact that they were, written in the mid-60s. So definitely a series that I would highly recommend and continue to highly recommend. These are copies that I have in my library. I was literally just recommending this to a student today, except I had all of them at home, so I couldn't totally recommend them. So I got to bring them back. Like, sorry, I had them at home. I was reading them. So that is the Chronicles of Prydain. And let's see if I can get to the next page without.
Kathy, I was just going to say you should be listening to the audiobooks for the correct name pronunciation, right? I usually have it pretty correct because I listen to the audio for everything.
Yeah, that's a good idea, except I kind of like the sort of not being sure about the pronunciation and then having to look it up, and then sort of being disappointed because it was like The way I had it in my head was the way I had it in my head. But even it was really interesting rereading it not long ago, how the images I had in my head were still the images I had in my head from the beginning. You know,
I
it
don't know
hadn't
if
changed.
either of you ever read Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar books,
No, I know. Yeah,
but
that's yeah.
so there's a character, Vaniel or Vaniel, which one is it, right? And so it's actually been pronounced both ways on audiobooks. So I actually just
Interesting.
disproved my whole rationale that you can listen to the audiobook and get the correct pronunciation. Also, Harry Potter, side note, it's pronounced Voldemort and then Voldemort on the American version through different books. So it's usually consistent within the same book, but he definitely started off, Jim Dale started off dropping the T, like the French pronunciation.
Yeah.
And then added it in later on.
I don't know. There's something to be said for the pronunciation in your head and like trying to work it out. I've seen the memes that say, you know, never shame someone for pronouncing something wrong because they probably heard it first time, you know, in their head from reading it in a book.
Yeah.
Which I think is very cool.
Well, you've convinced me. I still haven't read the Chronicles of Prydain, Kathy. You convinced me.
Yeah,
you really do need to. They're so good, and they stand up so well to the test of time. I think
I've been trying to figure out if I should buy another set, because they've been used so much that like I'm on the cusp of weeding or getting a new set or leaving them.
I would say, I mean, this is a
You've
nice new
convinced
set
me.
that I got from Permabound, so yeah, it's worth it. And it takes some hand selling, but if you've got kids who are into fantasy, I recommended this to a colleague's son. I think it was in 9th grade at the time, and apparently, according to her, he just devoured the books. So, you know, you get the right kid and they're gonna really enjoy it.
I had a couple kids find them on their own and tell me the same thing. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, again, it just stands up so well. So definitely recommend. So this was one that a student had asked me to, this girl with all the gifts. A student had asked me to get them years ago, and a couple of years ago, and I got them, and I thought, well, this sort of sounds interesting. And so I usually bring home a giant bag of books at the summer to read, and I thought, well, you know, this one sounds fun. I'll take this one. I ended up really enjoying this. So it's one of those that's I put it in the science fiction post-apocalyptic dystopian. It's not really dystopian because for me, dystopia is a man-made creation. Maybe like I feel like dystopian books are like political, whereas post-apocalyptic to me is the genre where a virus gets loosed and gets rid of half the population or 3/4 of the population, which is a little too close to real life. And I know Anna Rose can attest to the fact that there are books I recommended and they were like, what? It's too close to life. This one I really enjoyed. It was so entertaining. And it was made into a movie, supposedly. I have no idea if the movie was any good, but the main character, so it's a play on the zombie trope. So the reason I say it that way is a fungus has gotten out into human population that essentially eats people's brains and then takes over their brains. So that's how they become zombies. And this fungus is based on a real fungus that's actually out there. And so there are all these people out there. And the main thing with the people is that the people who are infected by this then become, all they want to do is eat human flesh. Except that there are these children like the main character here, the girl with all the gifts, who have the hunger, but also are sentient. They're aware, they can think, they have moral values. And it's that play on the zombie trope is so interesting. So it's the idea of a zombie in the brain eating sense, but who has an ethical and moral base. And she is kept captive by humans who are trying to figure them out and want to do experiments on them. I don't want to get any further than that. That's actually more than I usually want to share in this, because it's so interesting when you discover like who she really is and who her companions are. It's just interesting, because how often do you read a book where you are sympathetic to the zombie flesh-eating, character? And in this case, the way he writes that character is very, very interesting. So if you want just something fun, entertaining, somewhat thought-provoking, but not really, this is a really entertaining book, and one I would definitely recommend. It was a great summer read. So definitely one that I would say read. I book talked it with a student not long ago, and they checked it out. I have no idea if they're going to enjoy it or not, but one I would strongly recommend. And then this author wrote a kind of a prequel to the book that is the same kind of world, but it's earlier in the world. What I'd be interested, especially considering the end, which of course I don't want to give away, I'd love to know what the subsequent steps are like. All right, so I'm going to go on to my last book, and then I'm going to turn it over to one of you guys. I don't know who. This last book is so thought-provoking. This is a series of stories by Ted Chiang. He wrote the short story that Arrival. And there were aliens, and so she had to figure out how to interpret the alien language. And if you have not seen it, see it. It's so good. But there were several things I liked about this particular book. One, I mean, it was on Barack Obama's 2019 summer reading list, which I always like to look at his list. If you don't ever see it, you should definitely search it out, because he reads such a wide variety of books, and he almost always has an interesting YA and an interesting science fiction, just to see kind of what he's discovered that's out there. This one, because it's stories, it's really easy to just read, one story in a sitting, which is really nice. I like short stories for that, because you get your beginning, middle, end, you get your denouement, you get your climax, all of that in a relatively short period of time instead of days. And each of these stories in this collection are such a perfect example of what speculative fiction can do, where it can take modern life and then extend it into the consequences of modern life. That's what I like so much about speculative fiction, is it can just take an idea and just play with it. These stories, they're almost all set in a future or a potential future, or a way that technology has affected human life. And they really make you think about the consequences of that life. Again, I really appreciate the short story format, because you can read them fairly quickly, and each one of them you finish and you're like, whoa, what? Yeah, they're so good and so well written. If you just want something that is quick, but boy, does it play with your brain, I would definitely recommend these. All right. That's what I got. Do you want me to, Anna Rose, you want to go next since I have the slideshow up?
Yeah, that makes sense. But I wanted to say that the audiobook for The Girl with All the Gifts is really good.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah.
you read it. Good.
The movie, it threw me off because it wasn't what I visualized, but
Yeah.
you know.
Well, yeah. Right. Like the thing that the tank that they drive around in London while they're looking. Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know, but I can't imagine that it would live up to it. But isn't it a great story?
Yeah, it really made me think for a long time afterwards. I was very creeped out.
Yeah. Well, good. Yay. Creeped out is good.
Well,
All right. So I'm gonna go on to the next.
Yeah, no, and I just looked, and I know my job is the best. Our job is the best. I just looked, and they produced, I think it was Books on Tape produced The Chronicles of Prydain in 2004, the 5-book set. So not too old. Sometimes those recordings from like the 70s and 80s and 90s are a little unlistened toable. So I just bought them for Sora for my students, and I will be picking them first.
Yeah.
So yeah, excellent. For anyone watching who doesn't know what Sora is, if you use the public library's version of Overdrive is called Libby. Sora is the educational version that basically is the same experience for students, except it only searches books for K-12 kids, so it doesn't include adult books. And if you're like an elementary school kid, it doesn't include the young adult books either. So it's a way to sort of help curate the books, you know, for age level. But anyway, okay. Yeah, I was a little not knowing which direction to take with my book recommendations here, but they are in alphabetical order by author, as per good librarian practices. I was debating like whether to go from fantasy to sci-fi to supernatural. I know Kathy's shaking her head. I might be a little excessive. That might not be in every librarian trait, but anyway, this is Librarians, The Dividers, and as you can see here, of course, we do have the coolest job ever. We get to be professional fangirls, and I did just that. This was at Book Expo America in New York City in 2015. So at that time, you can see the sign behind us. Actually, Lair of Dreams is the second book in this series. And it was just coming out at that time. That's why she was at Book Expo that year. So the book was still an advanced reader's copy. So only The Dividers had come out. And I had, of course, picked up the book and I had read it and I had just been over the moon and obviously realized when I got to the end that it was going to be a series. So I was already super annoyed. And then I met her and explained that I was super annoyed. And she's like, well, it's actually going to be 4 books. I was like, not even 3. It's gonna be 4. I was like, I'm not reading any until she publishes the last. She didn't publish the last one until just this last year. So I had to wait 6 years, okay, to read books 2, 3, and 4. But I did, of course, reread book 1, and it's quite actually a lengthy book. I'd forgotten enough of the details. It was totally great to reread all over again. But I've always said since I read it that it was one of my favorite works of historical fiction. And I kept wanting to get my 8th grade social studies teacher to include it in like her actual historical fiction project, even though there's this total supernatural speculative component. I'm like, I don't care. It's like the best work of 1920s like historical fiction that you'll ever read. It is so evocative of time and place, the flapper culture, it's so wonderful. So there are a number of protagonists in this story, but the one that it starts with and sort of focuses on mostly for this first book is Evie O'Neill. She's 17 years old, small town Ohio girl, loving but sort of conservative parents, an older brother who had unfortunately passed away during World War I, and he was definitely like the favorite golden child. Her parents definitely don't love her as much as they loved her brother, even though you're not supposed to have favorites as parents. It's very clear to her that they did. Now, Evie has a special ability, a supernatural gift of reading objects. So let's say she takes somebody's pocket watch in her hand. it's the 1920s, right? So pocket watch. She would be able to tell that person something about themselves. It depends how personal that object is, what she can read from it. Sometimes it's just where they bought it or when, but sometimes it's much more. And so being that carefree, free-spirited, quintessential flapper, enjoys imbibing the alcohol a little more than she should, especially during Prohibition era. She gets herself into a bit of trouble at a party, again, small town Ohio, and her parents are just like, no, it's the wrong person. She sort of kind of pulls the wool over his eyes and tricks, and it doesn't go well. So her parents ship her out to New York City. I think this was a misguided decision on their part, but to live with her uncle. Now her uncle owns a museum of the occult, right? So I always have to tell kids what occult means. I'm like, oh God, I love middle school. They're so innocent. I'm like, oh God, I'm terrorizing them. No, it's fine. And you'd think, oh well, what's so supernatural about that? I mean, there's actual museums of the occult now, but no, there's definitely a supernatural twist to the story. Her uncle is commissioned by the police to help in a murder investigation, and it is this particular series of murders is very closely mirroring murders that happened 50 years in the past. And it comes to pass, of course, that they are supernatural in origin. And the story and the arc of the 4-book series continues on from there. And again, there are a number of other primary characters. So we get really great racial and ethnic and sexual orientation diversity throughout the entire series. And it was just gripping from beginning to end. Do not read it home alone in the dark. Like, it's definitely creepy, but so spectacular. And everything the author has ever written, including her Printz Award-winning, Printz is the award for excellence in writing for young adults, her Printz Award-winning book, Going Bovine, about a kid who contracts mad cow disease. And I laugh. It's not a funny thing, but it's funny in the book. So yeah. Anyway, Libba Bray, everything she's ever written.
I always feel like she wrote that book on a dare.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You write the funny book about mad cow disease, and so it reads like a dare. It doesn't read like a fully fleshed out.
Yeah, well, except it won the Printz Award, Kathy. So you can argue with the committee on that. She also wrote a book called Beauty Queens that was like Survivor meets Miss Congeniality. Oh my God, hilarious.
But that's also didn't she write Great and Terrible Beauty? And that, yeah, see that, I love that one. That's
another historical supernatural for folks who are, into speculative fiction. But and all of the books I'm recommending are young adult. I didn't go with any middle grade. So, I always ask adults who I'm recommending books to, do you mind reading young adult? And most of them are totally into it. Everyone's read The Hunger Games. Everyone loves Harry Potter. So not everybody, I understand, but to some degree, I think most adults have the capacity to enjoy a young adult book. And so that's, sort of but most of these are about older protagonists. Kathy, you can go to the next slide.
Yep.
And speaking of, so this book here was actually published for adults. Pierce Brown was not like, I'm a YA author, I'm going to write this book for teens. It was definitely published and was rebranded for teenagers, very much like Ready Player One and Uprooted, which, side note, Uprooted is a fantasy story. It's like totally appropriate for actually even middle school, except for this one quite gratuitous sex scene in the middle of the book. And I'm like, what is going on? I was like, oh, and then I find out the book was published for adults. I'm like, oh God. So now whenever a kid takes it, I'm like, there's a sex scene. They're like, oh, okay. They're like, too cool.
And then they get out all the copies and share it.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, middle schoolers are like, oh, and they'll put it back. Like, they're so cute. They're so
not my middle schoolers.
Anyway, so Red Rising is book one in an original trilogy, and then he is now writing what I'm going to call the sequel trilogy. It's really
the expanded universe.
Exactly. It's a continuation of the same, platform. It's just it's happening in a trilogy format, and he's still working on book 3 of that. So I have not read. I learned my lesson with books like The Diviners. I have not read the next part of it yet, but I did read this trilogy here. It begins with this book, and This is definitely like outer space science fiction. I mean, yes, post-apocalyptic in terms of we've depleted the Earth's resources and it's the future of that, and so we've had to go off planet. But it's not like we're on the planet experiencing the post-apocalypse, right? So I think of it more as like in the same sort of vein as like a Star Trek or a Star Wars, except we're still in our universe. So space exploration and warfare. And this book in particular, the first one, takes place on Mars. In the society, this future society, humanity has definitely transmorphed, right, in a variety of ways. People are classified by their colors. They're used different colors, and the different factions that these colors represent have changed physically. The Reds, our main character, Darrow, he's 16 when the story begins. He's a Red, and they're sort of like us, right? The average human now. But there's a faction of people who are the Golds, right? And they're the ruling class of people, and they're bigger and better and stronger physically, in addition to having all the power, like the governmental and political power and whatnot. So the Reds, of which I said Darrow is one, they believe that they are the first people to live on Mars. They're living underground, and they are mining helium-3, which is going to make the atmosphere habitable to humanity. They believe they are creating a future for humanity on Mars by mining this substance. And it's a really hard life. People die young. That's why it's age 16. Darrow is already married. That kind of thing. It's hard, but they think they're doing the right thing for the human race. And of course, the government is lying to them. Of course, it comes to pass, and Darrow's wife is sort of involved in this resistance group, and is actually killed for her involvement in that. It comes to light that no, the Reds are being tricked. They're being told this so that they'll work themselves to death, but actually people are already living above ground on Mars and other planets. And yes, they need the helium-3 that they're mining, but like it's already safe for people above the surface. And of course, this causes huge revolution. There's a resistance group and whatnot. Darrow goes crazy after his wife's death and is beaten practically to death. The resistance saves him, and for better or worse, whether he wants it or not, they rehabilitate him, essentially transforming him into a Gold, and so he can go undercover to their elite training academy. And that is the setup for book 1. There's a lot more space warfare, fighting on ships and stuff in space in the future books, but boy, it was excellent. And you know who recommended this book to me first was a guy at the Genius Bar at an Apple store. I told him I was a school librarian. He's like, have you read this? He's the guy who recommended Station 11 to me too, Kathy. I mean, it was Station 11.
Recommended Station 11.
I know, you did too, but he was the first one to say it. And then when you told him, oh, wait a minute, that's the same. So anyway, Station's 11, the book you guys should not read right now because it's like a pandemic kills everybody. It's, yeah.
Or do read it just because it's a good book.
Yeah, well, I did.
And a movie is coming out apparently.
Oh, yeah. I did have a kid take Fever 1793 today, which is about the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. I'm like, you sure? Sure. Okay.
I was just book talking Red Rising to a student today. She had wanted a book about castles. She was, kind of vague about castles. And so I remember during the competition scene, they're in a castle.
Yes. Well, because it's all like ancient Roman motifs and landscape and costuming and names and everything. Yeah. Yeah. It's
well, cool. I ended up, I also recommended the Chronicles of Prydain. I'm like, I'm sorry, I have them at home. I'll have to bring them to you. But that, and I didn't even do the Sabah Tahir books that I think, Tatiana, you're going to talk about. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Oh yeah. All right. Next. This
is a great series.
Got to get to those recommendations. I know. I can keep going on. My poor kids. I'm book talking to them so they can check out books, and I use the whole time talking about the books, and they have no time to check out books. Like that routinely happens. Okay. So Legendborn by Tracy Deonn was basically my favorite fantasy book of last year that I read. I thought that it was spectacular, and it did win the Coretta Scott King Book Award. author award for new talent.
Mhm.
So again, that's excellence in writing by and about African Americans is the Coretta Scott King Award. And there's author awards, illustrator awards, and honors. And then this is the award for new talent. I loved the premise of this. I don't think this program actually exists, but the premise is that there's a pre-college program for very bright high school juniors and seniors on the UNC Chapel Hill campus, which I've been to. I had a niece who went to UNC Chapel Hill, and so I could picture the descriptions of the location. So yeah, essentially these high school students attend college to 1 or 2 years early. And of course, there's certain parameters in place that's supposed to be keeping track of them since they're still technically in high school. But yeah, they're, how do you keep your thumb on teenagers like that? So yeah, that program definitely doesn't exist, but I thought it was believable enough where I was willing to suspend my disbelief. But this is what gets our protagonist out from under any parental supervision. It's just her and her dad. Her mother had died prior. But with, again, fantasy is so tough, right? So without getting too much into it, she arrives on this campus, and she, starts exploring the different clubs and activities, fraternities, sororities, and ends up discovering a secret society, the Order of the Round Table. And it's not just hearkening back to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It is King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It like magically. The leaders of the secret society are the reincarnations of these entities from the past. And of course, she meets a boy, and then there's another boy, and then of course the other boy is problematic, bad boy, dark and brooding. But then there's the love triangle. So there's a bit of that teen romance type of trope, but not so sappy that you can't deal with it. And the kids actually love it. My kids were all like, team this guy, team that guy. I'm like, okay, guys, like, I don't care, but sure. So she's discovering this, and of course it's dangerous, and she, as a young Black girl, does definitely not qualify to really be part of this secret society. And so that's one aspect of this. But the other aspect is that she has her own inherent magic that she didn't know about, that goes back to her African American slave culture, her own history, her mother's side of the family, a very different type of magic. And so it's about the melding of these two cultures, these two magics, her discovering herself and her past and her family, a lot of those common coming of age things for a teen book. But it was very, very well done. So I would definitely recommend that. And last up for me, I'm taking up as usual all the time. Go ahead, Kat.
What?
Okay.
No.
Yeah, there's that. So when an adult says to me, do you have a book recommendation? I say, do you mind reading young adult? No, it's fine. I say, read Side. And it is book one in a trilogy. And I did the thing where I read the book and then had to reread it once the other two books were published, but that was totally worth every second of that reread. You can't ask a librarian what their favorite book is, what their favorite author is. Even a favorite genre is really hard, I think. But I can definitively say that this is in the top 5 favorite science fiction books I've ever read. It's a bit mind-blowing. And part of it is that it's futuristic, but we're not dystopian, we don't think. It looks utopian, right? It's a future where the cloud, everything's in the cloud now, has turned into an artificial intelligence called the Thunderhead. But the Thunderhead is not evil. We're not, on 2001: A Space Odyssey. We're not. This isn't HAL, right? It's wonderful. It controls all aspects of the world and governance, and people have progressed to the point where medical science is caught up. People don't die anymore because when they, get old, they can turn the corner and become young again. They can jump off a building. It's called splatting. Teenagers actually do it for fun. They can jump off of a building and then get reanimated back. Their pieces can get put back together. I actually dream of having the little, the cells in my body, nanoed so that I don't have to work out as much. I could just be thin and fit without having to do all that work. So anyway, So the world would be overpopulated, right? If no one was dying. So the one thing that the Thunderhead doesn't control are the Sides, the Order of the Sides, and they are the government sanctioned assassins. And they independently decide who to kill and how to cull the population. Now, theoretically, they have codes of honor. That is not necessarily the case for every side, unfortunately. And so the first story is about our two teenage protagonists, a boy and a girl, who end up being apprenticed to one particular side. He's only supposed to have one apprentice and kind of gets into trouble for taking on two. And so they are set against each other in a bit of a competition. Only one of them will be able to actually become an actual side at the end of this first book in the series. But there's a lot more going on, deeper, governmentally, politically. It's one of those incredibly well told, mind blowing. Seriously, everything Neil Shusterman has written. Dry was another like near future or alternate present with a drought in Southern California that seems totally likely. Unwind is like there's a second civil war fought about abortion, pro-life versus pro-choice, and instead of coming to one side or the other, the compromise is that children can be aborted when they're teenagers, but not in utero. So they have to be born, but then their parents can like
the description of the one character getting unwound is.
I talk about it to seventh graders and say it's like retroactive abortion, and all 10 copies of the book go out in one period. Anyway, that's it. That's for me. I could keep talking and talking and talking. I have hundreds of options. I just, absolutely adore all speculative fiction. So
yeah.
Including the two Tatiana's going to talk about, which I've read as well.
Well, I mean, 4 technically.
Yes.
Sort of.
Kind of.
Series and
Yeah. So I was going to take a look at one science fiction series and a fantasy series. So the first one is the Illuminae Files with Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, which is set in the future. And this is the Ember and the Ashes with Saba Tahir, which pretty amazing, I have to say. Mm-hmm. And I was introduced to both of these series in audiobook form initially. And wow, I mean, it was so fun to listen to them and to listen to the narrators and their voices, because it's a cast of characters. It's not just one person reading, it's several narrators reading their individual characters. So you really hear a difference in it. I mean, it felt like a radio play to me, especially the Illuminae Files. So the Illuminae Files is actually written as a series of like text and chats and hacking and coding and secret correspondence between mega corporations and journals and such. So you can kind of see that there's actually I actually went back and read this one in print copies so that I wouldn't miss some of that that you just don't get in the audio. Oh, there we go. Yeah. And thank you. So the first book is set. So this is set in 2575. They're on the colony way out. Like you have to jump through wormholes to get to that location. One mega corporation has set up this, mining colony, and another corporation comes in and just destroys everything. But the focus is on these high school kids and how they like go through these like absolutely insurmountable like odds to try and survive and save basically their whole like world and their whole like everybody they know. So they end up, let's see, I have some notes here, but so they end up, like they break up. So it's, of course you have to have a romance. So they break up that morning, and the world is just coming to an end for them because their great romance is coming to an end, but then literally their world comes to an end. So they end up on this ship in space, and they're sort of limping along trying to get to the next wormhole so they can actually get back to civilization. They have a hostile warship coming at them. There's a plague, of course, from biowarfare, and then there's possibly a crazy AI, which is Aiden. And so it's just like everything that can go wrong goes wrong. And yet these kids that, of course, none of the adults trust them to actually do anything and know what they're talking about. These kids somehow end up like they hack into things. They just become these amazing, you know, they're normal kids, and they're like amazing and how they can get through these odds. Now, I don't want to give things away because this is, of course, a trilogy, and so I have to walk a fine line between telling you what's going on and not like giving things away. So the first book is about Katie and Ezra. And the second book is, let me make sure I got the names right. So the second book is Hannah, who is the daughter of the station captain, and Nick Malikoff, which is, he's you know, black market, like criminal gang guy. And his whole thing is he's going to sell drugs to her. And she's like totally, you know, obsessed with getting the right suit for the special day, that's the celebration that's coming up. But so Heimdall is the jump station that these guys are trying to get to, because they're trying to get back to civilization and let people know that their whole world has been taken over by this other mega corporation. So Hannah and Nick, of course, find themselves in this situation where the corporation comes in and destroys the station. And there's something about cows in there. So I'm just going to throw that in there. Cows in space. So that was a whole added element that I loved. So just kind of was ridiculous, but there you go. The last book, of course, goes back to the colony and looks at the survivors of that first, from the first book where they left the colony. So these are the survivors. So Asha is the cousin of Katie, and she's there with, she's part of this underground resistance movement that is trying to figure out how to survive, because of course there's one warship that's left there and they're just brutal in taking over the colony there. And this warship is trying to get back, like jump back, but the wormhole was damaged. So they're trying to mine enough, you know, I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, enough energy, get enough energy so they can actually jump back. And then, of course, they have to get rid of all the witnesses. So in the meantime, the group from the second book is now trying to limp their way back to the colony. And it's kind of a race against time. So anyway, I hope I didn't give away too much, but I love this series. I love it in audiobook, and I love it in print book. And I'm always trying to pawn this off on the students. So, all right. So Ember in the Ashes, like, oh my gosh, the voices in here are just like, I don't know, they're just amazing. So whoever, I can't remember the guy's name. I think it's like Steve West or something. He's the main male character. He's got one of those voices that you're just like, oh my God. So anyway, so there's three main characters, and there's different narrators for those characters. Actually, there's four. The one, he just pops up in the beginning and you hear a little bit at the end. But the Elias is really one of the main ones, and then Laia and Helene. So Elias is and Helene, Elias and Helene are learning to be soldiers. They're going to have this like silver mask that gets put over their face. So there's kind of this anonymous soldier where they can go in and they can arrest people, kill people, whatever it is the soldiers are supposed to be doing to make sure that the peasant population is basically, you know, doesn't uprise and take over. And Elias is being trained as one of these soldiers, and he just wants to be free. He wants to do his own thing. And there's a prophecy that basically says, you know, he will be free at some point. And so he believes it, and he really just tries to muddle through his life and figure out how to be free, but he just never is free. He's just always faced with this bad options on either end. Like he just can't do anything right where he's happy. Laia is what we call scholar girl. She's peasant. She ends up getting, her brother ends up getting arrested, and so she runs, and then is working with the resistance, trying to figure out how to free her brother. So of course, Elias and Laia meet up, and there's some romantic sparks. because there's always got to be something like that. And then of course, Helene is learning, because she's being trained to be a soldier as well. And her whole thing is she fights for her family. Like that is her main thing. So there's this sort of a love triangle, but it, anyway, it can't be easily defined like that. But anyway, what I really love about this is the characters are diverse. They're all like, they come from all over in their world. It's patterned after ancient Rome, but you're not just talking about blonde, white, blue-eyed, you've got a diverse set of characters, and I absolutely love that. So anyway, this is the Ember and the Ashes. We have Reaper at the Gate. So of course you got to throw in some magic and some dark underworld and djinn and all kinds of stuff with that. So you've got this amazing world where it's all warfare and fighting and swords and surviving, and then you have magic. And then there's Torch Against the Night, and I can't remember the last one, which I forgot to bring the book. I don't know why I didn't catch it. Is A Sky Beyond the Storm, which, oh my gosh, listening to these stories, like, it was amazing. And I just found out the other day that there's actually a graphic novel, which is a prequel, which I haven't seen or read. So I really can't wait.
Wow.
I know.
That's cool.
But this is like, neither one of these series are neat and tidy Hollywood endings. Like there's brutality and there's death on, no one is safe. And especially with the Ember and the Ashes, I mean, the world is like on the brink of absolute and total disaster. Anyway, I love these books.
You know what I liked about Ember and the Ashes was the amount of detail, the historical detail, the world building that she put in there. It seemed like it could plausibly be a real ancient history. Like, this is like ancient Rome and Israel. That's what it sounded like to me when I was reading it.
It did. Yeah. I mean, you could. It was just enough different that it wasn't ancient Rome, or
right. But, it's like Rome,
but it was easy to visualize because it was close enough.
Yeah.
Now, is she done with it?
I'm pretty sure. I think she's done with that series, except for she threw in that prequel, which I hadn't realized.
Yeah.
Well, my rule, but then these authors are killing me. It's like Leigh Bardugo. What is she doing? She writes a trilogy, then there's a duology, then there's duology. That's what I did this summer. I read the 7 books in the Grishaverse and the 2 short story collections that go along with it.
But then she has a brand new like sub series that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I just think Sabah Tahir, I think is the way she describes her setting, her settings is amazing. That really
she's great at world building and just you see it. I mean, it's tangible.
Like I'm remembering the scene when they're down in the crypts, I think, in the caves, and I mean, I just remember reading that and I'm like, oh, and I'm kind of claustrophobic, so I'm like,
So I listened to the first 3 books because I came in towards the end of the series and I didn't realize it was going to be 4. And so I was also a little irritated when I got to the 3rd book and it hadn't finished. And I was like, oh my God, there's a 4th book. So then it just came out recently. I don't remember when it was. And so I listened to it and it took me a while to kind of go, okay, the world, she built this world. It's been a while. What is it? And then I got into it and I was like, oh my God. So, and it definitely ends. I mean, the 4th book ends the series. So if she's going to have offshoots, that's fine. They're going to be standalone.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I did that when I was a teenager with The Wheel of Time, right? I read book 3, book 6.
Tell me about it.
6. Then 7 came out like a year later and I was already lost and I said, forget it, they're too long, I can't. So I never got back to it. And now it's like, I don't have enough time to read a series like that. I'd have to
start the whole thing, right?
No, And that also happened with Artemis Fowl. I read like through book 7 and then 8 hadn't come out and I never read book 8. I'm like, oh my God.
I only realized today that among the hidden series, there's like 10 books.
Oh.
I went out to the shelf to help a kid who was looking at a high school kid. And I was like, ever been Among the Hidden? And so I'm describing it. And I said, well, there's Among the Hidden. And I'm like, wait a minute. Look at all these other books that are out there. And so tell you a funny story about series, The Knife of Never Letting Go. That series. So I read the first book. And if you remember the first book, it just ends. Like a major thing happens and it just ends. And this was before any of the other books had come out. So I remember finishing it. I'm like, what? So then I had to wait until the next book came out. So
I know, you're like Patrick Ness. What are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
Seriously. And of course there's a movie. Have you seen the
I
trailers?
haven't seen it yet. No.
No, I know. I'm nervous because it's such a good book and I can't imagine how they can capture it well in
I know
film.
some of these things are really tough. I feel like Shadow and Bone did a great job.
Yeah.
When the author is part of the executive producing team, it really does make a difference. It's like George R.R. Martin being there for Game of Thrones, and it's like Diana Gabaldon being there for Outlander,
Right.
But Kathy, would you throw up our title slide again, and we'll take a smiling picture, and that has our contact information on it too.
Yep. All right, here we go.
So hopefully somebody who's watching this is like a parent of a kid, and you know now what all awesome stuff your school librarians can be sharing with your children, right?
Great.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Go backwards. There we go.
Oh my goodness.
Or I'll move
Sorry,
us out of the way. Oh, stop.
Been a long day, dude. Long day.
Yeah, Lord. No, wrong direction.
I thought you were
Lord.
going to take a picture for each slide.
Yeah.
I took some while we were going, but I wanted that first. You got to go back to that first slide, Kathy.
I'm trying.
It's slow. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So smile at the screen, ladies. All right, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Cool.
I'm assuming I got it. Let me just paste it.
Well, and Tatiana's name. See, that's what I was trying to do, was get this out of the way so you could see. There. Do it again.
Okay, hang on. This one was good though.
Wait, what did you do with my name?
I moved because probably I think our gallery pictures were covering your name.
Oh.
Not on my view, but I'll take it
Oh,
out.
okay. Well, never mind then.
Okay.
Good.
Well, it was fun chatting with you.
Yeah, it was fun. I know. We never get to do this.
I know. We could just talk with each other. It does, hopefully someone enjoys the presentation, but for God's sake, yeah, right?
Okay.
I know.
Yes.